The alien observers continued their study, focusing on a young human soldier named John, who had enlisted to fight in a conflict-ridden region. They monitored his thoughts, emotions, and actions, seeking insight into humanity's relationship with war. John grew up in a peaceful town with loving parents and siblings. He joined the military seeking adventure, camaraderie, and a sense of purpose. Initially, he believed in the mission, convinced that fighting would bring stability and protection to his country. However, as John faced the harsh realities of combat, the screams of the wounded, the stench of death, and the constant fear, his convictions began to crumble. He witnessed atrocities committed by both sides, and the once clear lines between good and evil blurred. One fateful night, John's unit was ambushed. As he scrambled for cover, he saw his best friend, Alex, fall beside him. Mortally wounded, Alex grasped John's hand and whispered, "Tell my family. I love them." In that moment, John's perspective shifted. The faceless enemy became people with families, hopes, and fears, just like his own. He realized that war wasn't a solution but a cycle of pain and revenge. The alien observers noted John's transformation. Zorvath asked, "Why do humans continue to engage in war when it causes such suffering?" Zexuan proposed, "Perhaps humans are not afraid of war because they're afraid of being vulnerable, of losing control. War provides a sense of agency, even if it's an illusion." John's story supported Zexuan's theory. Humans feared the unknown, the loss of loved ones, and the destruction of their world. War became a desperate attempt to assert control amidst chaos. As the observers concluded their study, they transmitted their findings to their planet. The report read, "Humans are not afraid of war, they are afraid of the darkness within and around them. Their conflicts arise from a complex tapestry of fear, vulnerability, and the quest for control." The Alien Council deliberated, weighing the implications. They decided to share their findings with humanity, hoping that understanding the root of their fears might guide them toward a path of peace. Would you like the story to continue, or would you like to explore a different direction? The alien observers, hidden from human sight, remained fascinated by John's inner turmoil. They watched as he returned from the ambush, haunted by Alex's death and the senseless violence that seemed to escalate with each passing day. His once strong sense of purpose was shattered, replaced by a growing despair that gnawed at him during every waking moment. The idea of heroism had been replaced with a grim understanding of survival, and his dreams were now filled with images of the faces he'd encountered on both sides of the battlefield. As the days went on, John became more withdrawn, questioning not only the war but his own motivations for joining it. He remembered his childhood in a peaceful town, far removed from the chaos of the battlefield. He had enlisted full of hope, imagining himself as a protector, a defender of his homeland. But now, in the trenches of war, it was difficult to reconcile that vision with the harsh reality of combat. The camaraderie he had sought was replaced with grief, and the adventure had turned into a nightmare. The alien observers, Zorvath and Zexuan, continued their analysis, deeply invested in John's story. Zorvath, intrigued by John's shifting mindset, asked Zexuan, "What will become of him? Will he abandon his mission, or will he find a way to reconcile his disillusionment with his duty?" Zexuan, ever the analyst, responded, "Humans are complex beings, driven by contradictory emotions. John may feel disillusioned, but the bonds he has with his comrades, the need for survival, and the fear of failure may keep him going. Humans are often torn between their ideals and the brutal realities they face, but they persist, even when they suffer." John's internal struggle deepened as the war dragged on. He had begun to question everything: his government, the reasons for the war, and the very nature of humanity itself. The lines between ally and enemy were no longer clear to him. He had seen his own side commit unspeakable acts of cruelty, and the soldiers he once thought of as enemies were no longer faceless adversaries, but individuals with stories, fears, and families, just like him. The weight of these revelations was almost too much to bear. One night, as John lay awake in his barracks, he found himself talking with a fellow soldier, Clara. She had been in the war longer than John and had lost many of her comrades. Clara, unlike John, didn't question the morality of war, she had grown numb to it. She spoke of survival, of simply doing what needed to be done to get through each day. But there was a bitterness in her voice, an underlying sadness that told John she wasn't as detached as she claimed. "Do you ever wonder why we're here?" John asked, his voice barely a whisper. Clara sighed, her eyes fixed on the stars outside the tent. "I stopped wondering a long time ago. There's no answer that'll make sense of all this. You either keep going, or you don't." John pondered her words, realizing that he had reached a crossroads. He could follow Clara's path, suppressing his emotions, numbing himself to the horrors around him, or he could continue to question, to search for meaning even in the midst of chaos. But the latter choice was painful, perhaps more painful than the physical wounds he had suffered. The alien observers noted this moment of decision. Zorvath, still perplexed by human nature, asked, why do they continue when they know the futility of their actions? When they understand the suffering, why do they not simply walk away? Zexuan, contemplating the complexity of human emotions, replied, it's not as simple as logic, Zorvath. Humans are bound by more than just survival instincts. They are driven by hope, even in the bleakest moments. Hope for a better world, hope for redemption, hope for an end to the suffering. It's this hope that keeps them moving forward, even when the path is uncertain. As John wrestled with his inner conflict, an opportunity arose. His unit was ordered to participate in a ceasefire negotiation, a rare moment of peace in the otherwise relentless war. John volunteered to be part of the team sent to the negotiation site, curious to see if peace was truly possible. He felt a flicker of hope, wondering if maybe, just maybe, this war could end and he could return home to his family, to the life he had left behind. At the negotiation table, John encountered soldiers from the opposing side, men and women who looked just as tired, just as worn down by the war as he was. They spoke of their families, of the towns they missed, of the lives they wanted to return to. John felt an unexpected connection with them, realizing that despite being on opposite sides, they were not so different. They all wanted the same thing, an end to the violence. The negotiations were tense, filled with suspicion and mistrust, but there were moments of genuine understanding, moments where both sides recognized the shared humanity of the other. For John, these moments were a revelation. He saw, for the first time, a glimmer of the peace he had once believed in. The alien observers watched closely as the negotiations unfolded. Zorvath was struck by the potential for peace, asking, could this be the moment where humanity finally turns away from war? Zexuan, ever cautious, responded, perhaps. But even if this war ends, the fear, the vulnerability that led to it will remain. Until humanity confronts the darkness within themselves, they will continue to struggle. John left the negotiations with a sense of cautious optimism. The war was not yet over, but he had seen the possibility of peace. He knew the road ahead would be difficult, filled with setbacks and challenges, but for the first time in a long while, he felt that there was a future worth fighting for, not through violence, but through understanding, through reconciliation. As the alien observers prepared to conclude their study, they recorded one final observation. Humans are capable of both great destruction and profound compassion. Their capacity for hope, even in the darkest moments, is what defines them. It is not war that drives them, but the search for meaning, for connection, for a world where they no longer need to fight. With that, the observers transmitted their findings, hoping that their insights would help guide humanity toward a brighter future. Whether or not humanity would heed the lessons was still uncertain, but the seeds of peace had been planted, and John's journey was far from over. As the ceasefire negotiations progressed, John found himself increasingly invested in the possibility of peace. He wasn't alone, many of his fellow soldiers, both allies and former enemies, were quietly hopeful that this fragile truce could hold. But the scars of war ran deep. Mistrust lingered, and there were those on both sides who were skeptical, convinced that the negotiations were merely a temporary pause in an inevitable cycle of violence. John spent his days watching the discussions unfold, studying the faces of the negotiators. He noticed how each side cautiously avoided certain topics, fearful of reigniting tensions. Yet, amidst the tension, there were moments of genuine understanding, where soldiers spoke not as enemies but as people who had suffered and lost. John saw in their eyes the same pain he carried, the same weariness. These moments felt almost sacred, as if the weight of war could lift, if only for a brief time. One afternoon, during a break in the negotiations, John struck up a conversation with a soldier from the opposing side, a man named Malik. They had shared nods of acknowledgement over the past few days, but this was the first time they truly spoke. Malik, like John, had joined the fight with idealistic notions of honor and duty. He had envisioned himself defending his homeland, fighting for justice. But the war had eroded those ideals, leaving behind only grief and confusion. I don't even know why we're still fighting, Malik confessed, staring at the ground. It feels like we're just going through the motions now. John nodded in agreement. I used to believe we were making a difference, that we were fighting for something important. But now, I'm not so sure. They sat in silence for a moment, the weight of their shared experience hanging between them. Then Malik looked at John and said, "Do you think peace is even possible? Or are we just fooling ourselves?" John didn't answer right away. He had asked himself the same question many times. But after days of watching these negotiations unfold, he felt something shifting within him. "I don't know," John finally replied, "but I think we have to try. If we give up now, then all the suffering, all the loss, it'll be for nothing." Malik seemed to ponder John's words for a moment, then nodded slowly. Yeah, maybe you're right. Their conversation was brief, but it left a lasting impression on John. For the first time, he felt as though he had found a kindred spirit on the other side, someone who understood the futility of their conflict. It was a small moment, but it gave John a renewed sense of purpose. He realized that peace wouldn't come easily, but it had to be pursued, no matter the cost. Meanwhile, the alien observers continued to document the unfolding events. Zorvath, who had been initially skeptical of humanity's capacity for change, began to see a new dimension to the species they had been studying. Perhaps humans are not as bound to war as we once thought, Zorvath mused, watching John and Malik's interaction. There is a longing for peace, buried beneath the layers of conflict. But will it be enough? Zexuan, still cautious, replied, the desire for peace is strong, but the forces that drive war, fear, anger, and the need for control, are equally powerful. Humans must confront those forces if they are to break free from the cycle. As the ceasefire continued, tensions rose. There were those on both sides, military leaders, politicians, and even some soldiers, who saw the negotiations as a sign of weakness. They feared that compromise would lead to vulnerability, that peace would come at too great a cost. Rumors of an impending attack spread through the ranks, and the fragile truce began to fray at the edges. John could feel the change in the air. He noticed how his comrades became more guarded, how the hope that had briefly flickered now dimmed as whispers of betrayal spread. The optimism he had felt just days ago seemed to slip through his fingers, and once again, the specter of war loomed large. One night, as John sat by the campfire, Clara approached him. She had noticed the shift in the atmosphere as well, and like John, she felt the growing tension. But unlike John, Clara had never truly believed the ceasefire would last. They're saying it's all falling apart, Clara said, sitting down next to John. That the other side is preparing to launch an attack. John shook his head. I don't believe that. I've spoken to them, Clara. They don't want to fight any more than we do. Clara looked at him, her expression hard. You're too trusting, John. People don't change that easily. War is what they know, it's what we all know. John didn't respond right away. He knew that Clara's cynicism wasn't unfounded. They had seen too much to believe in simple solutions. But he couldn't shake the feeling that there was still a chance for peace. We have to try, John said softly. If we don't, what's left? Clara sighed, her eyes weary. Maybe you're right. But I've been fighting too long to have that kind of hope anymore. As the days passed, it became clear that the rumors of an attack were not just talk. John's unit received orders to prepare for a possible assault, and the mood among the soldiers darkened. Even those who had been hopeful for peace now readied themselves for the worst. John felt torn between his duty to follow orders and his growing conviction that this war needed to end, not escalate. He couldn't bear the thought of more lives lost, more families torn apart. And so, he made a decision, a dangerous one. Late one night, under the cover of darkness, John slipped away from his camp and made his way to the enemy's lines.